the Yasuni National Park in Ecuador. One of the most biodiverse rainforests in the world. It shatters world records for a wide array of plant and animal groups, from amphibians to insects. They've recorded almost 600 species of birds, while a single hectare here boasts a larger variety of trees than in the whole of North America. Declared World Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO, the Yasuni Park covers 9,500 square kilometers just south of the Coca and Napo rivers in the heart of the Amazonian region. Two-thirds of the park are being exploited by oil companies after the discovery of large deposits of crude. It constitutes a major threat to this rich wilderness. So Ecuador has introduced the Yasuni Initiative to stop further oil drilling in the remaining one-third of the park if it can find the financial support from the international community.
Dependency on oil is not positive in the long term, because as you depend on that industry, you don't develop other sectors like ecotourism. Ecuador is a country that has a lot to offer in ecotourism. So I think Ecuador has become a green country devoted to long-term sustainable development. We can no longer rely on the price of oil or something that is not renewable, because eventually this resource will come to an end. How long will oil last here? For 10, 15, maybe 20 years, and then what?
Ecuador's Yasuni Initiative is the world's first green energy deal backed by the UN. It consists of leaving more than 800 million barrels of oil underground. That's as much as a fifth of its reserves. They say that'll stop the release of at least 407 million tons of carbon dioxide. That's as much as France emits each year. In return, rich countries should compensate Ecuador to the tune of at least half the market value of the untapped oil reserves. That's 2.7 billion euros.
Ecuador is saying we will not exploit 20% of our oil reserves. That is more than $7 billion. We are asking in return 50% of that money. The other 50% will be offered generously and unilaterally by Ecuador.
The money would feed a special trust fund supervised by the UNDP. Germany, its main supporter, is about to pledge around 40 million euros. And other nations could contribute, like France, Spain and Belgium.
With the interest generated, we will invest primarily in the effective conservation of the whole national park system, representing 5 million hectares, 20% of Ecuadorian territory. That's one of the highest rates in the world. Secondly, we'll prevent deforestation in those ecosystems beyond national parks. We'll promote sustainable social development in these areas so that their inhabitants have access to employment. We'll increase efficiency in energy consumption, and finally, we'll invest in the preservation of the last two indigenous peoples still not contacted by Western civilization that exist in Ecuador.
The indigenous communities in the park are wary about the plan. The Quechua tribes along the Napo River do want to preserve their natural habitat because they see ecotourism as key to their future. The Sani community managed to build its eco-lodge with the help of an oil company, not the state. They say the Ecuadorian government has been absent in a wild area where deals are struck directly between oil companies and the natives.
The oil company gave us a lot of help, unlike local governments. Only before the elections, some politicians came here to promise, if we win the elections, we'll do this and we'll give you that. But they never kept their promises. This lodge has been the result of cooperation between the oil company and our community. We own it and run it, thank God.
Con la petrolera y la comunidad que lo tenemos ahora, gracias a Dios.
But life can be tough living with the oil industry. This family lives close to an electricity substation that makes noise non-stop. They're surrounded by oil pipes, which at 80 degrees Celsius can cook an egg. And the thin tubes are prone to leaks or explosions due to the high pressure inside. Diocles Zambrano is a former woodcutter who's devoted his life to defending those affected by oil pollution.
The people who have lived near the oil wells since the beginning have been enduring all kinds of hardships because of frequent oil spills. Both crude oil and other chemicals have been dumped into the marshes, the rivers and the fields where people have their crops. Many people have died from several sorts of cancers like leukemia, as well as other incurable diseases.
Ha muerto una gran cantidad de gente por cánceres, por leucemias, por enfermedades incurables.
Local people suffer the consequences of oil spills in their daily life, but their protest is silent because the only job they can find here is cleaning up. Despite the disadvantages for people and the environment, oil remains the centerpiece of the Ecuadorian economy. So the temptation to keep on drilling appears too big for this developing country.
We shouldn't exploit the Yasuni National Park more than it is already exploited. It's a simple matter of conscience. It is not really fair to ask the international community for money to protect something that we have not been able to protect ourselves. From 2007, when the government announced the plan, there has been no real conviction. The state says that besides the Yasuni initiative, there is a plan B that exploits the oil field, and that plan is advancing much faster.
Indeed, oil pipelines are growing in the park, and several concessions to drill were granted right up to the time the trust fund was signed in early August. Workers from oil companies have been attacked by indigenous tribes hostile to their being there. In a wild area where the state presence is weak, NGOs can bridge the gap. The UNDP, the main supervisor of the trust, is financing several projects of sustainable development in the region with 2 tribes. This one aims at preserving the local palm, raw material used for handicrafts. It's another example that Yasuni's tribes want a future without oil.
Oil is going to end, so we need to preserve biodiversity, because if it ends, if they have no water, if they have no seeds, or their animals disappear, so their main source of protein vanishes, and they will slowly lose their livelihood, decreasing the chances of survival. We are now aware of that, so they are asking that the oil stays underground, so they support the Yasuni initiative, which should enforce their right to preserve a healthy environment. It should benefit everyone, not just the people who live here.
The official slogan calls the Yasuni project a big idea from a small country. There are those who believe instead that Ecuador is holding its rainforest to ransom. Others believe it's a revolutionary blueprint to combat climate change that could be followed by other oil-producing countries.